We like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Tonight we are back with everybody.
I actually remembered one of our coolest residents. So this was actually a good friend of mine. I don't want to give out too many details because it's a little bit sensitive, but her husband was... Right. Yeah, you went on this one. Her husband was a prison guard at a pretty major prison. And
it's a big enough place that I think we can... It was basically a major prison in California, like a bad prison.
Right, with some pretty bad dudes. And we actually had to go there 3 times, maybe 4 times, before we were finally able to get this cleared out. But it's really interesting. And I know you guys give me crap about my ability to touch an object.
Like a guitar?
Yeah, see, you're even my husband. You're not supposed to do that.
I'll give you credit on this because I saw this and witnessed this. So,
right, and usually when I hold something, I'll get a word in my head or a picture, just very brief. But I went in and he handed me a paper bag, and it was smaller than a lunch bag, and it wasn't very heavy at all. And I was holding this, and I said, I got nothing. And he looked at me, he was like, what do you mean? I said, seriously. I said, nothing. I'm holding the paper sack. And I stood there for a minute, and I said,
I sense there's groceries in this paper sack.
This paper bag was used to carry something.
Yeah, and he said, I said, no, I said, I have nothing. And I said, the only thing, I said, my wrists are burning, and I kind of rubbed both wrists because they were burning. He pulled the paper sack out of my hand, and out of the paper sack, he pulled a little baggie. And in the baggie, there were little 4 or 5 little bits of metal. And he said, this was on an inmate. He says, I took this off of an inmate that used it to get out of handcuffs. And that's the first time I'd had a physical response to an object. So I was like, hey, that's cool. Anyway.
What I like is when you told me that story, I'm like, hey, well, let me see what this does for you. And I handed her one of my gems that I recently bought that I've gotten some pretty interesting reactions from a couple different mediums. But as soon as I handed it to Deanne, I kind of had to chuckle a little bit because it was like the gem wanted to jump right out of her hand, and it was like screaming at her, this belongs to Tim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just said to me, I'm Tim's. And I'm like, you're Tim's.
It just didn't, it felt uncomfortable in her hand, and it literally did not want her to hold it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay then, that's a different response.
Yeah. I was like, I'm just getting just Tim. I mean, it wanted me to give it back.
I've handed it to other mediums. Peaches have held this stone, and she said it just kind of opened her abilities wide up.
Back to this residential, long story short, after going back 3 or 4 times, it was determined that one of the items that this gentleman had was cursed. One of the inmates had cursed it. And anyway, we were able to get rid of it, but it was probably one of the nastiest ones that I've dealt with.
Yeah, and in fact, we kind of figured out that basically that gentleman had been cursed by a specific inmate, and we were able to kind of figure out what that was and deal with it. But yeah, I actually witnessed Deanne do some of her, I can't remember what it's called.
Me neither.
Psychometry.
I just want to say psychokinesis, and I was like, that's not it. I don't bend things with my mind.
Saw Deanne do some psychometry there at that particular residential. But yeah, it was a good one, and it was interesting because I was able to pinpoint where the spirits were at by feel for the most part. Which is exactly where they had been the previous times that Deanne and everybody else had kind of sussed out. In fact, he had one son in his late teens, early 20s, who his room was just really, really incredibly dark.
Uh-huh.
Well, you should turn the light on.
We did, and it was still dark and heavy. But yeah, we were able to help them deal with that. And like you said, they haven't had any issues since, have they?
Mm-mm. Nope, they're good.
Now, I know a little bit...
Psychometry. Check.
Now, I know a few weeks ago on Facebook, Dan, you mentioned a little bit about ghost personalities. Did you want to go into that a little bit today, or save it for another?
Kind of. I know we've been. So we try to come up with new and interesting things to talk about, so we don't just talk about EVPs or something every week. But we try to mix it up, and so I ran an idea past Castle, and this has been several months ago. Ghost personalities, and then comparing it to people personality, living people personalities, and that's why I had everyone do the Myers-Briggs test. So that is something that we will still talk about.
Your personality doesn't change when you die.
I know, but stop it. We'll make it fun.
Deanne just assaulted Tim for the listeners.
Assaulted, not insulted.
Assaulted. I punched him in the arm.
That's what I said.
I
talked
assaulted.
to people today.
We talked to some listeners for
Yes.
3.5 hours today.
I was going to say we're going to talk about that. Tell us about your 3 hours that you guys spent related to the Benson grist mill.
Well, someone gave them some information that, again, was just screaming, that's not right. That's not what's going on at all. I contacted Peaches, and I'm like, hey, these people, they got some information that it seems like they're a little worried, and I feel like the information they received was not accurate, or is not as accurate as it should have been. I'm like, let's set up a time with them and go and talk to them about it. And we did. Called them and said, hey, is it okay if we come talk to you guys? And they're like, yeah, we'd love to. So we met up with them today. And there's a picture that they were shown. They were told that there's all these, like, what looks like possible orbs in the picture. And they were told that their daughter had opened something up and brought all of these spirits into their house, which to me didn't seem right. And I was actually able to have that confirmed when I showed the picture to Peaches. She's
I think I remember that picture. I saw that picture where they had a whole bunch of orbs in it.
None of those were orbs. There was one of all of those was an actual orb, and we eased their minds a little bit, told them it wasn't as scary as they thought it was, and just kind of let them know what was actually going on in their house. And then we talked about just like other things, like other investigations or other experiences that they've had, or just kind of like things that are going on around them or have happened around them. Like they mentioned that their daughter had seen a ghost that what was described to them was a red line, and the guy like grabbing his head and kind of pulling it, and the thought that they got was kind of like nearly had this Nick from Harry Potter where he's able to pull half of his head off. And I was hearing that, and Peaches actually kind of jumped in on this one as well, and I'm just like, that doesn't sound right either. What it was the red line wasn't actually red. It was the noose that the guy had used to hang himself.
Ah, that makes sense.
So his head wasn't like coming off or anything. It's just the guy had hung himself, and I think it was at a different house that was somewhere nearby where these people lived. It wasn't at their actual house. And what we found is, and I'm going to tell you guys right now that I'm going to mention that your daughter has a fluid aura, so if you don't want her to know, don't let her listen to this. You guys know who you are. They talk to her openly about the paranormal and stuff like that. They don't keep anything from her. She's aware of the show and knows what goes on, but her aura isn't solid like yours or mine or Deanne's or everybody's but Peaches. Her aura is more fluid, which usually means that she has some kind of spiritual gift, if that makes sense. And so this spirit can see that and decided that she was someone that could help him, even though she's a kid and she doesn't know exactly what's going on. So she did actually see this spirit. She was told by a different medium to just tell it to go away, which I believe she did, and the spirit ended up leaving the house. But to me, it seemed like they were just giving information that made it seem like there was something more sinister going on in their house, and there was nothing like that at all. It was just their daughter. At the picture that we talked about, it was a female spirit that was more like a guardian type spirit that was kind of watching over the daughter. So it wasn't nothing bad or anything negative. So I kind of felt like I said, I felt like the information they were given was incorrect or not. It's not like they were giving that information like incorrectly on purpose. That's just what that person was reading.
Right.
To me, it didn't seem right. It didn't seem that was what was actually going on. So I wanted to kind of verify and more or less like put the family at ease, let them know that it wasn't anything dark, it wasn't anything bad, it wasn't like nothing wrong happened or anything like that. It was just kind of random happenstance.
Well, and it's interesting because we've been on a number of investigations where when we get the initial information, it seems like there's something really sinister going on or something really dark in the home.
Yeah, people will call. We're vomiting pea soup and our heads are spinning and everything in the house is levitating, and then when you actually get there, it's like
it turns out to be something either totally different or something's been misinterpreted, if you will.
I think a lot of people too watch these TV shows, and I don't want to discount anybody that feels like, if something is happening in your home and you're feeling uncomfortable, by all means call us. But you get the handful every once in a while that I think like to embellish or maybe have been told things by people, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going into, but it's all fun, and we're happy to do it.
So, well, that's going to be our show for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network, found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright by Advanced Paranormal Services.